As we've taken on tough issues, I guess one of the benefits of stalemate is we're not doing anything. So it's kind of hard to sweat a decision since we're not making any, given the fact that, between the House and the Senate and the White House, there's such a fundamental disagreement on how to proceed on the budget and on other basic issues that whatever the House would pass, the Senate won't, and the White House wouldn't sign, and whatever the Senate would pass and the President would sign, the House won't pass. So they've lobbed stuff back and forth at each other over the course of the last couple of years. But thus far, we have not reached an agreement on where we're at in the budget. Now, and I'll say this again when Senator Murray is here, the Senate did pass a budget resolution this year. But if you take a look at the budget resolution that the Senate passed, and you take a look at the budget resolution that the House passed, I think that will give you the greatest idea of the Grand Canyon-like divide between the two. Because the way this is supposed to work is the House and the Senate are supposed to pass the same budget resolution eventually. House passes one, Senate passes one, they go to conference committee, and they come up with the basic numbers. And all that is the funding for the discretionary portion of the budget. It lays out the basic framework for doing the appropriations bills that we're doing. There's 12 different appropriations bills, and that's how you fund the government. But if the House and the Senate can't agree on the levels, the process stalls right from the very beginning. Now, they're going to keep working at it, because I still think we need to pass appropriations bills, but it has created a bit of a stalemate. And that's a problem in and of itself, because funding the government on a continuing resolution instead of a normal appropriations bill is a horrible way to try to operate. It's very complicated, it's very difficult to explain if you weren't actually in the government or trying to run one of those programs or dependent upon the funds. As I think many of you are in some piece of that. It's hard to explain, but basically continuing resolution just says we're going to keep doing what we did last year. Well, things change from year to year. And I know in particular my work with the Department of Defense, they have a devil of a time keeping programs going if they can't get an appropriations bill that gives them the new programs for the new year. So that uncertainty continues to create a problem. And meanwhile, beyond just the 1 year, we still have a fairly sizable 10-year debt and deficit coming at us that would be good to reconcile to some degree, and we still have a challenging economy. So that's sort of the tough aspect of it. There is some progress happening on some issues. Immigration reform is a huge issue that we've been wrestling with for better than a decade now, and the Senate has a bill. They're marking it up today, and then I guess they're going to keep marking it up next week. It's a big bill, but there is some progress being made on that. In my own little world, in the Department of Defense, we have for 51 straight years passed the National Defense Authorizing Act, which authorizes a wide variety of different programs and deals with a lot of very important policy questions. Yes, there's money in it, but it also deals with some of the policy challenges. This year, there's been a lot of focus on sexual assault in the military and what policies we can change to try to get that problem under control. So we're working on that, and then a whole slew of other policies. Guantanamo has been back in the news recently. What are we going to do about that? Drones, the authorization for the use of military force, the ongoing fight with Al-Qaeda, all that stuff's rolled into the policy of the National Defense Authorizing Act, which we're set to mark up at the end of May and then pass out of the floor in June. So there are pieces of legislation moving forward, but on those big picture questions, 2012 was essentially, in an ironic way, a status quo election. It gave us, Republican House, Democratic Senate, Democratic President, just like we had had before. It was a little bit ironic in the sense that I will point out Democrats actually got more votes nationwide in the House by a fairly comfortable margin. We just won fewer seats. And if you want to understand how that can work, take a look at the state of Pennsylvania, which is 13-5 for the Republicans. Rather sizable difference. And yet again, in Pennsylvania, Democrats got more votes collectively in the state in House races than Republicans did, but only won 5 seats. That is the miracle of redistricting. And the fact that the Republicans controlled in Pennsylvania and Ohio was in a similar situation. And so therefore, the way the districts were drawn, enabled them to win more seats even as they were winning fewer votes. And that's obviously not going to change until the next redistricting. So interesting challenges there. And that's the last thing I want to say before I introduce our first speaker. The other big change in my world is I have a brand new district this year for our 12th annual 9th District Day. And my district changed more than any other in the state of Washington. Actually, the population is 55% new in the new district. I sort of lopped off the southern 2/3 of the district and moved north. It's almost entirely a King County district now. 98% of the population is in King County. Plus I have Northeast Tacoma and the Port of Tacoma. And people have asked me, how does that change things? What do you? First of all, it's new constituents. So my staff and I have done a very aggressive job of getting out there and getting to know those new constituents and what some of those issues are and building those relationships. But overall, and this is the positive note that I will end on, the Puget Sound region is very interconnected. I've said from the start when I represented the 9th District that I don't confine myself to the boundaries of the 9th District because there's issues across the street that have an impact, and I'm not going to ignore them just because they don't happen to be in my district. The Port of Seattle, Port of Tacoma are major drivers for our economy. The University of Washington is a major driver, Microsoft, a lot of other tech businesses. The transportation corridors cross those lines. Funding those new transportation corridors is important. So basically, it's still the same region. And I think we're moving in a positive direction. I think there's a lot of very good things going on in the Puget Sound region. We are an economy that has a great capacity for innovation, change, and growth. The Boeing company, I don't know if anyone's here has represented them, is doing great. The 737 coming out of the plant down there at the south end of Lake Washington is just going gangbusters. And there's a whole lot of companies that feed into that. So I think there's a lot of positive things happening even in this difficult environment. But the interesting thing today as we have our speakers come through and talk about what's going on is, where they see the stalemate going. Because we've got this sizable stalemate on the budget, on tax policy and spending policy. How is that going to be resolved? I think it's one of the more interesting questions. Obviously, there's a bunch of other things going on the national security front. We've got Syria, we're trying to get out of Afghanistan. There are many challenges, across the globe that we deal with every day. So I hope it will be an interesting discussion. Again, I thank you so much for coming here, and I appreciate that. And I thank my staff. I'll introduce them. I think most of them are out of the room right now, with a couple of exceptions. But I do want to thank, in particular, Shanna Chandler, my chief of staff, and then Rebecca Nathanson, who is my new scheduler, and this is her first 9th District Day, and that's the person who's most responsible for pulling it together. So she's done a great job. It's probably the most difficult and stressful thing that the scheduler has to do in our office every year, so I really appreciate her getting that done. So we'll start. Our first speaker is Winnie Stachelberg, who's the Executive Vice President of External Affairs for the Center for American Progress. Center for American Progress is a progressive think tank here in Washington, D.C. One of the things about 10 years ago, so that long ago, people were sort of noticing that the conservative movement, because it had been out of power for a while in terms of controlling Congress, had built a very vast network of think tanks and policy institutes and sort of the basic idea factory and communications factory of a policy movement. And on the other hand, the Democrats, we may have been in Congress, but we really didn't have that. And as the the Gingrich Revolution came in, and as we began to lose some of that, we said, well, gosh, we need some ideas. We need to reorganize. The Center for American Progress was really one of the leading groups that sort of came together and said, okay, how do we do that? How do we develop a communication strategy and a think tank to start getting some progressive ideas out there? And Winnie has been with them, I think, since 2006, if I'm reading my notes correctly, helping to organize those ideas. She was with the Human Rights Campaign before that, and has been, an advocate for a variety of different progressive causes. And in addition to being an advocate, really, how do you put the arguments together to advance that policy? It's one thing to stand up and say, this is what I believe. It's a whole other thing to organize it in a way that you can actually move that forward in a representative democracy in a public policy way. And Winnie's been right in the middle of that. And I'll say one final thing about that. man, has it changed. I remember 1990 when I ran my first state Senate campaign. No cable, no cable news, no internet, no nothing, just, these walking lists. In fact, I was talking with Jeff Bjornstad, who was my campaign manager way back then. He said he went out doorbelling with somebody the other day, and it's all on an iPhone. They've got an app now that gives you the walking lists. You want to make a note, as you talk to the person, it's all right there. I remember our stacks of lists and how we went through the Thomas Guide, if anyone remembers the Thomas Guide, and pulled the maps out. Now, if you want to communicate, it's a 24/7 world. It's the internet, it's cable, it's so many different points of attention. A much more complicated task to communicate effectively a message. And I look forward to hearing from Ms. Stachelberg about how she goes about doing that here in Washington D.C. And I thank you very much for joining us. And I don't know if you were here earlier when I warned you, but there's a guy who's going to give you a coin when we're done. It's great to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. I hope you all know, those of you who are constituents in the room and those of you who get to work with Congressman Smith on a daily basis, how lucky you all are. I've been doing this work for, a couple decades. The Human Rights Campaign, I started off at the Office of Management and Budget. I've been at the Center for American Progress for 7 years. As you described the gridlock and the deadlock here in Washington, I did scratch my head and wonder, do I really like what I do? Have I chosen the right profession? In fact, having been at CAP now for 7 years, I really do love, I love what I do. I have a great job. And you have a great advocate and a great representative here in the Congressman. And I think, he came to CAP actually at the end of last year to talk about the U.S.-Russian relations after the reset, sort of in September before the election last year. And I think one of the things that I really value about the Congressman and about the perspective that he brings to his work every single day is, and I think he just mentioned it in his remarks, the interconnectedness of the world in which we live, that you can't look at any of these issues in isolation. They're all integrated, they're all interconnected. The fact that he's willing to take on the issues of constituents who are not in his district, the way he looks at international relations issues, that you need a muscled military that is the right size in the right place. You need a foreign service and foreign assistance that's in the right size and in the right place. His voice and his work on Syria, on the Middle East, on foreign assistance has really been amazing, and he's been a true partner for all of us at CAP. So I want to thank you for all of your good work, and again, welcome to each of you who are here. Again, yes, Winnie Stachelberg, I'm the Executive Vice President at the Center for American Progress. We are a think tank here in Washington. We've been around for 10 years. In fact, this October we celebrate our 10th anniversary. To put that in perspective, Heritage, I guess I'd call them our competitors, although they're having a really bad week, so I don't really want to associate myself with them. They've come out with some sort of really ugly analysis about comprehensive immigration reform, not just about the cost of comprehensive immigration reform, but really, I think, doing the worst of think tank work. So I used to like to compare us to Heritage, and now I'm just going to park them over here and not do that. But they're 40 years old. So the Heritage Institute is 40 years old. Center for American Progress, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary, a decade of progress, a decade more to come and beyond, for sure. I want to talk a little bit about sort of just how the Center for American Progress got started. The Congressman alluded to it a bit. The kinds of work we do, the ways we do our work, because I think it is innovative and it represents a difference, and it represents sort of a new way of think tanks operating. We like to call ourselves a think tank, but sort of not your grandma's think tank. We're a little bit more of a think tank and an action tank with a component that is really aggressive on the advocacy side as well as the communication side. And then talk a little bit about some of the sort of fights of the day, the things that we're working on right now and how we're doing it. And then I think we've got some time for Q&A, and I really look forward to that part. Let me just say that we were started 10 years ago because there was this complete hole in the progressive, liberal, democratic side of the spectrum in terms of a rapid response think tank that could not only come up with progressive policy ideas, but also figure out ways to inject those ideas into the debate of the month, the debate of the year, and the debate of the moment. And so John Podesta, who was President Clinton's former chief of staff, got together in a office building not too far from here, in an office at Georgetown University Law Center, and worked with a couple of really smart women. Neera Tanden is one of them. She's currently the president and CEO of CAP, to come up with the Center for American Progress. And I think it's an idea and a place that has really taken hold. We talk to a lot of people, this is not to pat ourselves on the back, talk to a lot of people these days who say, I'm shocked that CAP is only 10 years old, and where were we before the Center for American Progress was founded? And we really are an institution dedicated to improving the lives of Americans through progressive ideas and action, as I mentioned. And we sort of build on the achievements of progressive leaders like Teddy Roosevelt and Martin Luther King, and our work addresses 21st century challenges such as energy, national security, economic growth, poverty, immigration, LGBT issues, healthcare, climate, international issues, the military, and reducing gun violence, women's issues, and sort of everything in between. We're a multi-issue think tank that doesn't like to work in silos in much the same way that I think the Congressman sees the interconnectedness of so many issues. We work in that way as well. It makes for a very busy day, but it makes for an incredibly rich and robust set of policy recommendations that we put forward. Got about 200 plus staff, maybe closer to 225 staff, mostly here in Washington, but senior fellows sort of all over the country and some in other countries. John Podesta, as I mentioned, he was Clinton's chief of staff. He ran President Obama's transition in 2008 to early 2009, January 2009. We ended up losing about 75 CAP employees to the administration, sort of an interesting ebb and flow as we enter into the second term of the Obama administration. Many of those first-termers have come back to CAP, which is great. We're sort of seeding a progressive infrastructure of staff, both in the administration, up here on the Hill, and in government. I should note that two of our alumni are the current Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, who worked on the Hill for a long time, worked for Senator Daschle, who is a distinguished senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and is now President Obama's Chief of Staff. Dennis worked at CAP for a couple of years. And Jennifer Palmieri, who is currently the Communications Director for the administration, also was a long-time CAP staffer. So, clearly we have close relationships with the administration, and that doesn't hurt. We also have deep relationships with people here up on the Hill, and in the community, the progressive community here in Washington, other public policy influencers, and around the country. I don't know whether people know or follow Think Progress. That is our blog. Think Progress was launched early on at the CAP career. Judd Legum, who was at CAP and is the editor-in-chief of our blog. It's got 40 million annual unique visitors last year, about close to 6 million unique visitors a month. And I think the reason why we launched a blog is because so much work gets done when the media covers a story, when they write about it from a local perspective, when they write about it from a national perspective. All you have to do is look at the sequester. Had the press not covered in the ways that it did, the long lines at airports, and the fact that air traffic controllers were being furloughed, if the media hadn't covered that story, maybe action wouldn't have happened in Congress and in the administration. But what happens when the story isn't big enough, or it doesn't pop, it doesn't break through normal media channels? Well, you've got to make media happen. And so our blog, with as many viewers as it has, is not only seen by citizens around the country, but it's also picked up by reporters. Sadly, our media business, our newspapers, our radio, it's a shrinking pot. And so there's a scramble to get attention for your issue. One of the things that we're trying to do in the context of the sequester is I have nothing against airline travelers. They shouldn't have to wait too long, but then again, we shouldn't be cutting Head Start slots either. And where's the voice? Where's the advocacy? Where's the passion? Where are the stories about all of those Head Start kids and parents and grandparents who are struggling to ensure that their children get the same kind of early childhood education that is so critical to economic growth, to reducing poverty and the rest. Well, the media isn't covering that story. The advocates aren't as organized. There isn't as much money behind those kinds of communities and constituencies. Well, Think Progress is going to go out to Head Start centers. We're going to send trackers, we'll send journalists who work for Think Progress. We have about 25 people who work for the blog. They're journalists themselves. They have media credentials. And they'll go out and help create stories. Start local, build those stories up so that there's more national attention on the fact that the sequester doesn't just affect those with a loud voice or those with a strong lobby here in Washington, but also affect average everyday citizens. So that's a way in which we work at CAP. And we work sort of hand in hand, the Center for American Progress and the Center for American Progress Action Fund, which has our blog and which has Think Progress War Room, which is a rapid response sort of pushback operation. We work in two ways. We want to promote progressive ideas. That's the think tank part. So we come up with an idea. Here's an example. Back in 2005, one of the first issues that John Podesta and Neera Tanden worked on was healthcare. It was a passion of theirs. And they wrote an article that appeared in Health Affairs, a very wonky health journal, read only by wonky health experts, talking about why we needed universal health care. That was in 2005, and they wrote that with Jean Lambro. Jean Lambro happens to be in the White House now working on health care. And in 2005, kind of an interesting, different time, right? We had President Bush in the White House and a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate. And we had this great idea about universal health care. And do you know how many people wanted to pick that up? Like none. Democrats, Republicans, no one wanted that. People were interested in pursuing state-based approaches. Massachusetts had just passed a law. California was struggling to pass something. People were thinking about state approaches, but never, don't have a universal system of healthcare for everyone. Don't cover everyone. And we were pushing the envelope. So we first had a wonky journal article, that's the think tank part. And then in 2006, around the congressional elections, we identified a couple of candidates running both in the Senate and the House who could run on a platform of universal health care. And some of those people won. And we could tell the story that one of the reasons why they won was because they ran on a platform of covering all Americans. And then in 2007, as we were gearing up for the Democratic primary, the presidential side, we convened a healthcare forum, invited all Republicans and Democratic candidates, only the Democrats showed up, at a healthcare forum where we asked every Democratic candidate to come forward with their plan for healthcare. And we did that at UNLV with Service Employees International Union, SEIU. So it was a presidential forum where we required that every candidate who was running for president in 2008, as early as March of 2007, had to have a universal health care plan. And it was an interesting debate. And there were some people who said Senator Clinton won. There were some people who said Senator Obama won.